This is Business Rockstars from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Jeannie Yerman, and my guest is Daniela Perdomo. She is the CEO and co-founder of goTenna. So goTenna, what are you guys all about?
We create a radical alternative to centralized communications infrastructure. So we've created a mesh protocol that can enable people to connect directly with one another using regular phones, but not using any of the communication infrastructure we use every day, things like cell towers, the internet, or even satellites. So, on the consumer side, we have this device here, goTenna Mesh, that pairs to your phone and allows you to create a network with anyone else who has a device, whether you know they're there or not. And if they're out of personal range of you, then you're able to hop through any other device in the area. And we have a product called goTenna Pro that does similar things on a more powerful level for professional users.
Got it. And then all you need is what? You need a phone, the device, what else?
That's it. You need a phone and the device, and you can also leave unpaired devices in different locations to grow the network. So it doesn't have to be one device per person or per phone. Unpaired devices can also extend the range of connectivity.
So in the second part of our chat, we'll get into kind of like how this all came about. But prior to goTenna, you were working at startups, right? Tech startups? Like, tell me about where you were and what you were doing.
Sure. I worked at a variety of different software and media startups, and I had nothing to do with telecommunications, but I had a lot of experience at early stage companies in everything except being a CEO or an engineer, really. So I played a variety of roles throughout the business side of tech startups before starting goTenna.
So you co-founded this company with your brother, Georges, right? He is your chief evangelist. Mm-hmm. Your dad at some point said that he imagined that you guys would be in some sort of career that didn't exist yet. What do you make of that?
My father's an engineer, and he actually taught himself to code. So he was an agricultural engineer. He taught himself to code really early on in order to understand soil science and predicting agricultural returns really early on, like in the early 80s. And I feel like he just saw very clearly that his children would one day be working in fields that simply did not exist because there was just so much innovation ahead of us. And he was right. Yes, me and my brother Georges co-founded goTenna together, and our youngest brother studied computer science and is currently working in tech as well in San Francisco.
Did you imagine that you would be an entrepreneur leading a company?
No. I always wanted to be a writer, and indeed my first job out of school I was a journalist. I am really interested in stories and ideas, but I think that those are things that are also common to entrepreneurs.
In what way, though?
I mean, I think that entrepreneurs are creative people in just different ways from maybe what I imagined when I was younger. I always thought maybe I'd be writing books. I was a journalist right out of school, but I think that creating a product and a company is also a very original creative act.
Do you have nights where you're just staring at the ceiling and overwhelmed with some of the challenges and of the business, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I would say I had more nights like that earlier on. I think in the last couple of years, I've grown increasingly confident, especially as the caliber of people that we can hire, the patents that we're granted, the contracts that we're landing. I feel less concerned about the viability of the business. Now it's more just how do we execute on the opportunity and the technology that we have created.
So, I have to ask, I do have to ask, do you feel that it is any different being a female and head of a startup versus males? And you say you've got a number of friends in, different startups. What's your take?
Yeah, the question around like what's it like to run a company while being female is, a question I get a lot, and it's certainly one I've thought about a lot. I don't feel it on a day-to-day basis within like the bubble of goTenna itself, because I've always been the CEO of that company, of course. But yeah, I just got back this weekend from a retreat with one of our major investors, and most of the other portfolio CEOs are not women. There are also much fewer women in hard tech and science and enterprise-focused businesses, and so that I think the biases are additive, but I've been fortunate for the most part, to be working with investors and partners and colleagues who I don't think make me feel like, oh, you're a woman first and a CEO second.
So in thinking about this business and kind of what you've learned, how old is the company now, by the way?
5.5 years old.
Okay, so you guys, you have some traction, you've been in business for a bit. Now, with, kind of that time frame, looking back, what is the advice that you would give yourself if you were just starting out again?
The advice I give myself still today, but which I certainly share with people who are, maybe earlier on in the journey of starting a company and running it, is just to be more generous with yourself, because I feel like it's sometimes really easy to acknowledge wins by others, but just to just always be less proud of yourself for getting through difficult stages. And I think that having just more clarity that, you're, as long as you're generally moving in the right direction, it's okay to have days that are really, really difficult. And I think I have, historically been more attached to lows than to highs. And that makes celebrating the highs, less impactful, frankly.
Right, I've heard of that as consolidating the wins, right? Basically cutting yourself some slack.
Yeah, no, I think self-care is really important, and it's not something that a lot of founders, I think, really focus on. It's always just about what's the next thing I have to do, as opposed to how am I feeling right now? And I think that it's a disservice to the business to not actually also take care of yourself and the people that you're working with.
This is Business Rockstars from the NASDAQ market site. My guest is Daniela Perdomo. She's with goTenna. We'll have more in just a minute. This is Business Rockstars from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. My guest is Daniela Perdomo. She is the CEO and co-founder of goTenna. So, goTenna, recap, what do you guys do?
We are a mesh protocol company, which means that we're creating platforms to enable completely off-grid, scalable, resilient communication systems that don't require any centralized infrastructure. So we turn the phone you already have in your pocket into a node in a completely decentralized communications network.
And I think to kind of further help the audience understand kind of how this came about, it was two things, right? It was Hurricane Sandy, was it? And also your brother kind of going to a concert, not being able to text his buddies there, right?
Correct, yeah. So 5.5 years ago, the idea for goTenna came to us, in two particular instances. First, to my brother, who was going to a lot of concerts and realized that if you're in a place with a lot of people, like in Times Square or a rave, as was the case for him, the centralized towers cannot keep up with the usage, and so by entering the network or being part of the network, you're actually making it worse for everyone else. So that was one realization he had. And then a few weeks later, I was living here in New York, and Hurricane Sandy downed over a third of all towers and power stations, disconnecting us from both the internet and cell connectivity when we needed it most. And so I started to think about what was wrong with our communications infrastructure in spite of depending on it for everything. We have a system that has a central point of failure and is also geographically constrained. And so what might it take to turn the phones that we already have on us all the time into real peer-to-peer communication devices? And that's when we realized that there wasn't an app for that. In fact, there couldn't be an app for that. We had to actually create dedicated hardware that would unlock your phone's full potential.
Right. So in terms of funding, how did you guys go about it?
Sure. So we have raised a few rounds of venture capital, a little over $18 million at this point. We're lucky to work with some really, really great investors, including our last round was led by Union Square Ventures, and they're really supportive. And the money that we've raised has allowed us to do the hard work of really building the platform, perfecting and iterating on the technology, and of course to hire really great people. And the fundamentals of our business are really good. It's high margins. We are in what some people like to describe as a creative monopoly, which is that by creating a new option in the marketplace, we are actually not directly competitive with any incumbent systems. And so if anything, we're complementary with other technology in the telecommunications stack, and that's a really good place to be.
So that actually brings me to the question of, do you prefer to be known as an innovator or disruptor?
Oh, I think innovator. I think disruption of the word disrupt is used too much. I think technology is only truly disruptive when it's accessible to anyone who needs access to that technology. And we're a long way from that. Our technology still requires a smartphone. Many people in the world cannot afford a smartphone. But I'm really excited and I'm driven by the potential of our technology one day really being truly accessible to people who live on a few dollars a day. And in fact, I remember my first ever pitch deck had an emerging market slide, and we're not there yet. But we started with consumer, we moved into professional, B2B, and government markets, and I am starting to believe that we will probably get to emerging markets as well.
So what are the price points on these devices?
So our consumer devices, we sell them in pairs, so $179 for 2 devices. And our professional device we sell for $500, but we also sell a deployment kit with various units in it and other features for $20,000. And that might sound like a lot of money, but it's actually in some cases 40 times cheaper than existing tactile communication devices. So on the professional side, we're really attractive from like a size, weight, power, and cost perspective.
And basically people are able to text. That's the idea, is text communications?
Yeah, we're focused on asynchronous data communication, so bursts of data. So that's texts, that's locations. In our professional product, you're able to send also certain images, and we might do more beyond that. But what we realized, and look, all communications are subject to the laws of physics, and so if you want to do real time, high quality voice or video, you're just going to have a device that has a much bigger battery. It's going to have to be literally bigger. It's going to just not be able to scale as much. And so what we're focused on is creating the most scalable, completely mobile mesh architecture that's ever existed. And in doing so, the core design principle that we've really grown attached to is that by doing bursty data, we can create devices that are low power, low cost, easy to use, and almost infinitely scalable. And so, I think what's so exciting about a mesh network is the potential for it to just scale, hugely. And so if we had not made this decision to focus on bursty data, then we would have a network that might cap itself off at, 30 or so users. And so by doing this, we've created just a much more scalable and interesting solution.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, Daniela.
Thank you for having me.
From the NASDAQ market site in Times Square, this is Business Rockstars.